I am a third-year undergraduate music ed major at the University of North Texas. I am originally from Northern Virginia in the DC area, so I decided to do my equity audit project on the school district I grew up in, Loudoun County Public Schools. So, just for those of you who are unfamiliar with Virginia, which is probably most people watching this, Loudoun County is in the very northernmost part of the state, right along the Maryland border right here. So Loudoun County Public Schools, the county and the district are the same. So as we can see, the enrollment, it's fairly large, 82,500. There are 98 schools, and they're building more all the time. I think there are, I don't know the exact number, but I think there are almost 20 high schools there. And they built like at least 2 or 3 just during the time I was in middle and high school alone. So very large, constantly growing. A very high graduation rate, as we can see. And then with the demographics of the school district as a whole, we can see it's fairly diverse. Less than half white, 24% Asian, 18% Hispanic or Latino, 7% Black, 0.6% American Indian, and 0.1% Native Hawaiian. And then finally, Loudoun County is a very affluent county in general. It's, as we can see, the median household income is up at almost $157,000. So it's very affluent as a whole, but as we'll see in the next couple slides, that does differ pretty widely across the county. So here are 2 of the regions, smaller towns, whatever, within Loudoun County. So Ashburn is in more of the central part of the county, I would say. As we can see here, they have a higher population of whites than the Loudoun County School District as a whole. Again, this is the city of Ashburn, not the school district. Let's see, 7% Black students, only 10% Hispanic or Latino. Only 30% of households do not speak English at home. The median household income is still pretty high, $139,000. And then if you look over at Sterling, which is in the very eastern part of the county, this is closer to where I grew up. We have, as you can see, the demographics are pretty different. There's a much lower percentage of non-Hispanic whites, only 31%, and a much higher percentage of Hispanic and Latino people, 45%. And a lot more of the households do not speak English at home. There's also a significantly lower household income than in Ashburn. So now we're going to look at 2 high schools located in each of these regions. So in Ashburn, I chose to look at Briar Woods High School. Here it is on the map. These schools are only like 15 minutes apart. So the schools are really densely packed in. It's interesting like what stark contrasts there are without having to drive very far. So over at Briar Woods High School, the students are generally like very high achieving, especially in English reading and writing. And then if you look over at Parkview High School in Sterling, there are much lower scores, especially English reading and writing. English writing is down to 62%, biology 45%. So we're going to look at some of the inequities that cause those differences in achievements. And just here are some more stats on inequities in Loudoun County Public Schools. So shockingly, Black students are 4.2 times more likely to be suspended than white students. Segregation, the ProPublica rated segregation between Black and white students as medium and Hispanic and white students as high, which we can kind of see how that happens when we look at those stark demographic differences between 2 regions of the same county. And then Hispanic students are on average almost 2 grades academically behind their white counterparts. And then white students are 1.9 and 1.6 more likely to be enrolled in an AP course than Hispanic and Black students. So let's take a look at some of the problems and some possible solutions. So the first problem I identified is Black students being disciplined at much higher rates. We saw 4.2 times more likely than white students. So some possible solutions. In my research, one thing I wanted to note, more security in schools is not a reasonable solution. Finn and Servas, in a study that they did, found that high schools with higher levels of security were actually associated with increased suspension rates and increased racial disparities in those suspensions. So instead, Loudoun County Public Schools need to prioritize hiring teachers that are more reflective of the student population. So I found that this was as of 2017, so it may have changed, but 87% of the teachers were white, 87%, but only 44% of the students are. So obviously there's a pretty big disparity there. And then also those teachers just need more training in the things we've talked about in this class, like implicit bias, social emotional learning, and culturally responsive teaching, so that they can understand how their implicit biases may influence how they're perceiving and responding to student behavior. So another possible solution is going to be implementing restorative justice, which I found really interesting. It's sort of an alternative to suspension where you allow the students to kind of work things out themselves individually and in small groups, and kind of, identify their own behaviors and solve the problems on their own. So I found a report by the Oakland Unified School District talking about their successes with this and how it was able to build caring relationships, allow students to take ownership, and help to address some of those underlying equity issues. So the second problem I identified is the segregation in the school districts, especially between white and Hispanic students. That contrast between Briarwoods and Parkview High School really shows us how, even though the county as a whole is fairly diverse, the school district as a whole is fairly diverse, most students seem to be attending a school that is where the dominant race is their own. So like Briarwoods is majority white, Parkview majority Hispanic. So I think the best solution for this that I saw through my research would just be to redraw those school attendance boundary lines in order to increase racial and socioeconomic diversity across all Loudoun County schools. This is a tough problem to tackle, obviously, because schools are segregated because neighborhoods are segregated. And when those zoning lines are drawn, neighborhoods tend to be concentrated with people of the same race and socioeconomic status, especially in Loudoun County. So by default, the schools end up with all these kids. So all of the poorer non-white students are concentrated in the same schools. But if we were to redraw those lines, then we would be able to kind of shift the balance and mix things around, so that the makeup of each school is a little bit more balanced, and kids are, the poorer, more disadvantaged students are attending schools with more higher income students, and therefore the schools that have better resources. So I found that this was fairly successful in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where recently they required each school to have a socioeconomic balance that reflects the district as a whole, and allowed for I think there was a program where families were able to rank their top school choices, and the school district would kind of match students with schools to kind of try to go along with that, but also achieve a balance. And then I found that there was actually a school board meeting in October of this year where there was a proposed boundary change that, among other things, would shift the zoning so that some of the students that are currently zoned for Riverbend Middle School, which I found has 23% Hispanic or Latino population, and have them go to Belmont Ridge Middle School, which only has a 9% Hispanic population. So a change like that might kind of help to offset some of that segregation and help make all the schools more balanced. And then the final problem I identified is that Black and Hispanic students in Loudoun County are falling behind academically and are underrepresented in advanced courses. So some possible solutions, again, I think a big focus should be on hiring more teachers of color, because as we saw, 87% of Loudoun County teachers are white, and that obviously does not at all reflect the makeup of the student population. So in this study, they found that students, and especially Black and lower performing students, actually improved academically when they were taught by someone of their own race, which makes sense. They're kind of able to relate to someone more. And then also teachers and counselors need to be aware of implicit biases that will impact their judgment when they're making course recommendations. So they may be less likely, even if they're not consciously trying to do it, they may be less likely to recommend Black students, for instance, to take an AP level class. And then also I think Loudoun County should expand the advanced course offerings at schools with higher minority populations because Kayla Patrick's study here found that Black and Hispanic students are perfectly successful in advanced courses when they're given the opportunity, but oftentimes they are not given that opportunity in underserved schools. There are not enough spots, and students of color are denied enrollment in those classes. And then the final solution, using the book that I studied this semester that I really enjoyed, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. I think there's a lot of techniques from this book that can be incorporated by Loudoun County teachers and higher-ups to try to reduce that opportunity gap and raise the achievement of Black and Hispanic and underprivileged students. So, like I was mentioning before, teachers may unconsciously hold these students to lower standards. And students who are constantly being faced with microaggressions and stereotypes for their race are constantly going to be on high alert, which means they're not going to feel safe and build trust, and they're not going to be ready to learn and grow. So to combat this, there should be a focus on positive student-teacher relationships rooted in affirmation, respect, and validation. Teachers should use active demandingness, so having high expectations but still being warm and caring about it to help transform dependent learners into independent. And then finally, to better engage with students of color, teachers should promote collectivist values because these are more ingrained in a lot of those minority cultures. So in conclusion, obviously LCPS still has a long way to go towards reducing inequities, but here I've identified a few things that they can do, and some of them I'm sure they're already doing and already working on because, we all know this is a problem. So overall, I think they should hire teachers that more accurately reflect the students, more non-white teachers basically, redraw the school's zoning lines to balance the school demographics, implement restorative justice as an alternative to suspension, and then utilize culturally responsive teaching and other science-backed techniques to boost student achievement. And then here are the sources I used. Thank you so much for watching.